Hello, I'm Anawultus, and today I would like to discuss and ponder a bit about a comment that I had gotten on a video uh, relating to where I was describing the structure of the government that I was envisioning, and someone had commented a question about imperial cities. Now, if you don't know what an imperial city is, now this was a comment on BitChute. An imperial city is a city, all right, in the Holy Roman Empire that had imperial immediacy. So this would be similar in a sense to how in many countries, maybe, for example, Germany, you've got the city of Hamburg is one of the states of Germany, even though it's mostly a city, or Bremen is a state of Germany, or Berlin is a state of Germany, as opposed to larger places like Saxony, Bavaria, and places like that, where it's multiple cities. But in this particular sense, it would be a city that has immediacy, therefore is part of a first level division of a state. Now, I do acknowledge that there are two particular cases that are particularly interesting when or at least complex when you analyze my idea of how this government should work. And these cases are, of course, the cases of large urban areas and, of course, distant colonies. But today what I'm going to be talking about is large urban areas. Now, of course, my particular system, just to be very clear, does not give more power to low population communities over large population communities in any broad sense. And what I mean by that is that if a city is large, for example, if it's too large to have only one police station, that would be an example of something that is large enough to warrant what I would say multiple sub-communes when we analyze these things. So in essence, it's how, for example, New York City has 5 boroughs in it. You've got Manhattan, you've got Queens, you've got Staten Island, and the others. So in a similar sense, it makes sense to me to divide large contiguous urban areas into subgroups for the purpose of representation, and also for other purposes of efficiency and governance. Now, I will say, however, that when it concerns contiguous urban areas, I would apply what I call the principle of locality, where ideally you do not have gerrymandered regions, but rather areas that are coherent in some sense. And how this would apply to a large urban area is that the particular divisions in which a large urban area, contiguous urban area to be exact, is divided in is based on the contiguity of it. In other sense, if you have a large city that has a population large enough that you would divide it into multiple sub-areas, and you also have small rural towns around it, what you would not do is divide the whole land into a bit of a pie where you've got a big city and the rural area, because that actually would make the governance of the city relatively inefficient. What you would do is you would ensure that whenever a super jurisdiction occurs over the communes, that any super jurisdiction prefers contiguous urban areas over non-contiguous urban areas. In other words, you get as many of these jurisdictions into the city itself before you then fan out from there into the wider rural areas. Now, when it concerns the actual governance of a city, I do recognize that there are certain particularities of the governance of a city that would be inconvenient if it is fully decentralized. So I would say that contiguous urban areas would have would have two particular extensions of this principle. One is in infrastructure. What does that mean? What that means is concerning infrastructure, all of the areas that include the contiguous urban area send, in addition to sending delegates in a normal way up to the pyramid, as you would call it, they also each send a delegate that has authority on infrastructure to a committee that then works with the infrastructure and then passes on the budget to the highest level that includes the entirety of the contiguous urban area. And when the particular taxation is decided, I would say that each area of this whole region would, in theory, still be allowed to have its own taxation system. However, the way it would happen is all parts of a contiguous urban area are then equally accorded the amount of tax proportional to its population, and then each part then decides how they're going to levy the taxes for that when it concerns government projects. Now, the other committee that would have to be established is one concerning law enforcement, and not the court system, because the court system would be just fine in the other traditional way that the court system would be established by the normal jurisdictions. But when it concerns a contiguous urban area, what they would have to do is each commune in there would send a delegate to the coordination committee when it concerns this, in order to have essentially a unified front when it concerns crime fighting and law enforcement and potentially armed forces, if the need arises. So ultimately, therefore, it is united in the sense that the infrastructure, which obviously needs to be united for a contiguous urban area, as well as coordination among the polices. Now, when it actually concerns issues on social rules and particular economic issues, I still would delegate that to the communes themselves. It's just that in the contiguous urban region, that would not, there are particularities which would not make sense to delegate to such a local level. Now, there's another particularity when it concerns what some might call imperial cities, and that would be what I refer to as the jurisdictional capitals, or federal cities. And these are areas, now remember, this is not a federal system, as in the system does not derive its power from any federative origin, but it's more a distributed democratic system. But when it concerns each jurisdiction, okay, let's say you've got 20 communes in one jurisdiction. There, of course, needs to be a place for them to meet up, and that is the capital of that jurisdiction. Now, that location, all right, that location needs to be neutral to the jurisdictions, because the jurisdictions are allowed to have a wide range on social laws. It also would serve as a location to place individuals who had left a citizenship for a particular commune without finding a new one, so they would provisionally be allowed to settle in the federal territory. However, the government would reserve the right to remove them from that territory, and they also would not be able to vote because they are not properly in a proper area. As in, the federal territory is not meant to be an economically active area. It's just meant to be a convenient place for the delegations to meet so that they can function the government levels. Now, when it concerns the federal territory, I would also say that punishment for crime should be particularly strict, so that people aren't tempted to go there, so that they can shirk their responsibilities and various laws. And also, when it concerns the application of non-essential regulations that particularly relate to how things function in the federal cities, I would say that each member of the delegation should then receive a free veto regarding those particular issues, as they are not essential to the governance. And I also don't want essentially various groups of people coming together and harassing other members of other delegations because of this. So it essentially is primarily a place for government offices. However, it also could be used as a temporary place to put people who do not have a particular place that they can call home until that place is found. So that, and of course, each level of government would have its own equivalent to that, even up to and including the Supreme Council would have that as well. So that's ultimately what I see in how my system would relate to concepts that one could call imperial cities. And I want to emphasize two things: that, of course, if you have a city that has a large population, it is going to have a larger amount of influence, because due to the principle that government should be communal and not operated in an inefficiently large manner, so that representation increases and accountability increases by keeping government local when it concerns social and economic issues, it makes sense for me to divide even large cities into subdivisions, but it also means that there's more subdivisions among these large cities, which means that they do not lose in influence by not being fully united under one coherent entity. At the same time, it makes sense that particular issues relating to infrastructure are indeed collectivized in contiguous urban zones, and that law enforcement should be coordinated as well. And this means that, however, I still do reject the idea that any particular commune should have its own immediacy relating to the level of government. Ultimately, I devised a system on how these jurisdictions can split and merge, which I'm not going to discuss now because it's actually very complicated, that allows for there to be always an equal number of levels of government in each jurisdiction. And of course, the bigger the total size of a population is, the more levels of government would necessarily exist. So anyway, thank you all for listening to this. Hopefully this hasn't been particularly technical. But if you are interested in learning more, or perhaps to engage on a particular thing I said, maybe there's something you disagree with, maybe there's something that you think is better in a different way, I would like to hear that as well. So thank you all for listening to, I guess, what would be a bit of a long explanation on these issues. Now, of course, there's actually a lot more depth to this, but ultimately, I believe that when it concerns governments, there should not only be a constitution which defines rights and particular operations relating to central government, that there should also be a full civil code and among other things, so that there is a general procedure and understanding, so that no one can get accused of abusing people's rights or doing something that is in some way inappropriate when it concerns government. Because as much as common law system can be useful, I do believe that there's always, and has always been, a large potential for abuse in it, which is why I favor civil codes. So anyway, thank you all for listening, and I will be seeing you all next time on A Wiltos Over and Out.